today's clinic is going to be talking all about unions. So thank you for joining us for this one. Across the creative industry, unions have a very strong presence and in the games industry, there's an increasing amount of people who are seeking representation through a union rep. So in today's session, we're going to be diving into what the role of the unions are, and also why they're part of the solution are for some better working conditions. We do want you to be able to lead the session with knowledge about how to get the best outcomes for your employees and support. For anybody who hasn't seen one of these sessions before, our usual way of doing this is like a Q&A session. So usually Sarah asks me questions. For this one, I will be asking her the questions. So we do have a list of questions that are a mix of common questions that are asked and ones that have been submitted as well. So I'm going to take you through those, Sarah, and hopefully we can discuss a bit between us.
It's always funny when the tables are turned, isn't it? But thank you. Hopefully this will all go swimmingly in my brain, can remember all this information for this session. And it's a useful session for everyone.
Well, if not, hopefully I can plug some gaps along the way as well. So firstly, a question here that comes up quite often actually. So we have an issue with an employee. They've asked for their union rep to attend. We don't recognise any unions. Do we still have to agree to a union rep attending?
So this is a really interesting question, isn't it? As you said, it comes up quite a lot, this one. And we are going to get into little bit later the logistics of recognising unions. So because there's sort of some questions about that later in today's session. But I think what's really important to remember here is that for all outcomes for disciplinaries and grievances to be recognised as sort of following good practice or best practice by tribunals, we kind of tend to say stick to the ACAS guidelines, so the ACAS rules, and ACAS sort of recommend that it's good practice to have allow representation at any formal meeting. So whether that's related to performance capability, ill health capability, any formal kind of absence meetings, or as we said, disciplinaries and grievances. So that the short answer is yes. If somebody has a union rep, yes, please do allow that person to have them. There are, I would say, and I think this is where you do need HR advice. There's very occasionally there is an exception, but generally speaking, I think it's good practice to recognise a union and support them to be on that in that meeting.
Yeah, and we do have some questions around kind of recognising unions as well. But just for clarity, you don't need as a business to recognise a union for an employee to have the right to be accompanied by a union rep. It is just standard practice. You'll see most of the time that any formal letters that are sent out for these type of formal meetings will always state that the person has the right to be accompanied by either a trained union rep or a work colleague. So like Sarah said, that's when it's best to offer that support out. And even though the ACAS guidelines are around disciplinary and grievance, it's commonly looked at in tribunals for formal meetings, and especially formal meetings that may potentially end in some form of termination of employment, for that offer of support to be provided to the employee.
Yeah, and I think it's just making sure that, you know, particularly when it's a formal process, and sort of remembering that an employee having anyone in that call can be supportive for them, because you know, when it's a serious matter, it's quite overwhelming, isn't it? And a union rep, their role is to understand the legislation and the support that can be around you. So perhaps to understand it less from an intimidating sort of point of view, and more of a how can we support the employees and us to get the best outcome.
Yeah, For sure. I guess leading on from that as well, there's another question around if an employee wants to have a union rep there as their supporting person, but the union rep is unavailable at the time that the meeting is scheduled, what obligations does the employer have in terms of rescheduling that meeting?
So again, I think what's important here is to remember what's reasonable. So this is a test that happens in the tribunals as well alongside unlawfulness. So what's reasonable here? So if you're asking, an employee to be available within 48 hours of you scheduling, if you sort of recognizing that there's an issue, then it's reasonable that the union has time to prepare themselves and that employee for that call. So sometimes these things can be complex, sometimes these things can be, there's a lot to take on board. So that's the first thing to understand, is that what's reasonable. Second thing, therefore, is to take it on that if they're not available, and that can happen, and it does happen, then try and get a date with as quickly as you can, because reasonable is about sort of speed, not speed as in rushing through a process, but actually making sure that the process isn't drawn out and difficult. So really it's about what's reasonable. If the union said, well, I'm not available for another 2 weeks, then it's about saying, well, actually, is there someone else that can represent you in the union, and or otherwise. So it's just about sort of making sure that you're conscious of what's reasonable and what's reasonable in time length as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is often the guideline that if you are able to reschedule and within 5 working days, and it doesn't come outside of that reasonableness, depending on the situation, because every situation is going to be different, every case is going to be different, then that's what would be seen as you doing the right thing as an employer by offering something to be rescheduled within that relative working time. But like Sarah has said as well, things are going to be different depending on the circumstances of that meeting, what it means, how complex it is, and so on. And also whether it's going to be a detriment to have to reschedule further down the line. And that's going to be most important probably for disciplinaries. So it's bearing all of it in mind, and just like we keep saying, being reasonable.
There's 3 tests I think that's important to understand within a tribunal situation, and if we kind of take that then back to the root of where a tribunal might have begun, our kind of tests are obviously unlawfulness, but the other thing is reasonableness, and the other is unfairness. So if we are leaving something to go on for weeks or months or something, we're being unreasonable and we're being unfair, and the chances are we might also be starting to fall into some of the unlawfulness there as well, because we might be falling into areas of a lack of duty of care or something like that. So it's complex, that, but I think what's important to understand is sort of speed over haste is important, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. So leading on from that, once in a meeting, if an employee is accompanied by a union rep, what is the union rep permitted to do in that meeting?
Again, this is a question that comes up quite a lot. This is a really important, and this is a question I've had pretty much all my working life around unions, and I think you probably say the same, Alexandra. So I think there's some really, really important things about this. Is a union rep, much like any other representation that is with you in that space, is really there to support the employee. They're not there to speak up for you, so they can't answer questions for you, and they can't put your case forward. So they can't put your I suppose, for want of a better word, your defence forward. But what they can do is they can ask for adjournments, and by that they mean you might be getting overwhelmed by the information, or the employee might be getting overwhelmed by the information that's coming at them. It might be that they're feeling quite emotional by it. It's a very stressful situation sometimes, particularly when it's a complex disciplinary or grievance setting. It can be emotive. So a union rep is there to sort of perhaps calm the emotion, and give you a moment for reflection and an adjournment. They can also summarise at the end of a session. So sometimes at the end of that adjournment session, or at the end of that general session, they can summarise. But what they what they can't do is to speak up for you. But what they can do is perhaps clarify a question. So if you're confused, the person they're representing is clearly confused, they can just clarify that. They can rephrase that, but they're not allowed to answer for you.
No, they are able to ask questions as well, if they're within the realm of reasonableness, and those questions are justified. I think as long as the person holding the meeting, chairing that meeting, has been trained appropriately to be the person having that conversation and having that meeting, they should be aware of the boundaries of where they can push back to a union on saying, okay, this is now reaching a level where you shouldn't be interacting with us in this way. And quite often, I think that's another area that we see falls down quite a bit. People are either they're not trained in holding these meetings and these conversations appropriately, or they don't have the ability to, or they're too afraid to push back to a union. So where they might know that they're potentially overstepping those boundaries, they let them.
Yeah.
And that can then sidetrack that whole conversation and that whole meeting, and it becomes something very different to what it was intended to be in the first place.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that even in a situation where it's a disciplinary or a grievance, where it can be quite tricky and it can be quite very stressful, usually in those settings it's about seeking to understand both sides and both positions, and it shouldn't be an attack. Although when there's a very complex situation, or there's a situation where someone has clearly done something sort of significant, it can be challenging. But what we're trying to do is keep the emotions moving, rather than it turn into a sort of an ambush on he said, she said, whatever that might be. And so we're trying to sort of keep it kind of, you can see I'm struggling to articulate it, but it's around about like what's professional and what's again coming back to what's fair and equal, rather than letting it become emotions run high and it become sort of a test of both the sort of employer and the kind of employee. It's about kind of how do we reach a satisfactory outcome here.
Yeah, and also for reference, there's no difference here in terms of what a union rep is allowed to contribute during these meetings versus if it was a workplace colleague that person brought in. It's exactly the same rights. There's no difference just because that person is a union rep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to a slightly different area. The next question is, what is a collective agreement, firstly?
Okay, so collective agreements are something, again, I get asked about quite a lot. Collective agreements are usually something whereby if you are going to make a big change within the business, you'd get a collective agreement through the union representatives to make those changes. Alexandra, I'm sure you're going to have more to add to this, because this is quite a complex piece of legislation and in itself. But generally speaking, a collective agreement might be traditionally sort of where, I don't know, an organisation is about to make a big restructuring, and you might have kind of collective agreements in terms of kind of what that looks like from a union representative moving forward. But also union representatives can have collective agreements more generally about what does an organisation, what's their role, and what does good look like for them.
Yeah, so this comes into place when an employer is recognising a union. So if you are a company, a business organisation who is recognising a union or has recognised a union, you will have a collective agreement in place that basically defines, it can define anything from salaries, other terms and conditions, ways of working, policies, all that kind of stuff that's agreed collectively across the business. If that is in place, then that's when you have to negotiate with the union on behalf of the employees to firstly agree what is in that agreement, but then also if you are then making changes across the business in future, you then have to go back and negotiate through the unions as a first measure, so that that whole process is seen through in the right way according to legislation.
What can be really interesting in these settings, particularly in a bigger organisation, or an organisation where you've got different union representatives. So, for example, you might have back to musicians union in representatives in one organisation. What could be really different and interesting in that is that they might have different perspectives on what the changes and how the changes might reflect on them. And so going back to, well, what was our original agreement and how do we sort of move forward from that, can be complex. So those can be very interesting negotiations, and in some cases you may not always reach an outcome that is where you want it to be as a business, because their role is to represent the people that they're representing, and your outcome may not always be the position that they're seeing it from. And those can be quite, having been involved in those can be quite challenging and quite lengthy in terms of how we reach a satisfactory outcome. So it is really important when you're thinking of collective agreements, if it is in place within your organisation or how you operate, that you think about timelines for how long those negotiations and changes might happen, because they may not happen overnight.
Yeah, they definitely will not happen overnight. There's a lot of toing and froing that tends to happen, a bit like the ping pong situation with the ERB at the moment.
Yes. That's
okay, so in terms of employee rights, what rights do they have to join a union?
So it is unlawful for you to stop anyone from joining a union. So they must be able to have the right to join a union. You do not, even though, and this is where it becomes quite challenging, particularly if you're a small organisation, but across any organisation. If you don't recognise the union, you still have to recognise the fact that someone has the right to join it and the right to representation, therefore. So even though you might not recognise, therefore, a collective agreement that's put together by a union, you still must seek to support someone who wants to have union representation.
Yeah, and interestingly, this is something as part of the Employment Rights Bill that's going through consultation at the moment, in terms of an employer's duty to inform workers of their right to join a trade union. That's something that's been proposed as a new thing that employers are going to have to do. Currently timeline for around October next year, but who knows with the way that things are going right now. So that's quite a major thing when it comes down to an employer's obligation. Like, if you are going to have to create a statement to actually inform all of your workers and all of your new starters of their right to join a trade union, it's an additional process that's going to come into play, and it's additional knowledge for the employee to be able to go ahead and do that. It's almost a prompt for them to explore it further. will be interesting to see what happens here through that consultation period. I think as part of that as well, there is also the proposal to deliver a statement annually to the existing workforce as well. So it's not even just when somebody joins or when this legislation comes in, it's then annual reminders.
Okay, that's interesting. So then that is almost a prompt to the organisation as well to move into the collective agreement space as well, isn't it? It's about kind of what, if these changes are coming, then this is, you know, or this is what the legislation is. How do we all explore what that feels like for us, and then, you know, move forward? And, you know, it will never, probably won't be around things like salary, but you never know. Okay. Yeah. Let's move on, because otherwise we'll be lost in a theory of what the ERB is doing, and that's just break your brain.
So you've touched on how it's unlawful for an employer to prevent somebody from joining a union. What about employees' rights in terms of treatment if they have joined a union?
Okay, again, really good question, and again, a question that we get from time to time. You can't treat an employee differently because they've joined a union. By that, if they need time off for union, like conversations, to attend union events or what have you, you must give it. You mustn't discriminate against them. And effectively, although it isn't a protected characteristic and it isn't one of those characteristics, effectively it would be classed as just discriminatory action if you were to stop somebody from attending union sessions or time of their union, or to treat them differently because of their union representation. So you must enable that and allow that. And actually, I think it's probably a test of a good employer if you're supporting that. You don't necessarily have to recognise, but you can definitely support that action, because it's basically looking to, you know, they want you to, they're looking for what's fair, so you're saying I'm fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The union has submitted a formal recognition process to us. What do we do?
So this is the thing where if a union is saying that they want recognition within your organisation, then there is a structured process. I have to say, I haven't seen this happen that often, but I have to say that the process is quite clear cut. There is a central arbitration committee, so it goes through a process by which that arbitration committee determine the level of support that is given. They then effectively help you implement that. They're not there. It wouldn't be fair and reasonable for you to them to just go, right, here, we're here. Yeah, they do help you. So and once that formal recognition process has begun, you are then supposed to be informing your employees that's what's going on. So it's consultation, because effectively it's sort of a change. So what you're looking to do is to part of the arbitration, if you like, is to consult with your team. You're then going to be looking at, well, probably part of that arbitration process is probably looking at collective agreements and what can you bring in. So it's a big change. It's looking at, and you are supposed to start to recognise that. By not recognising it, you're in hot water. And I've never heard of anyone who doesn't. So I wouldn't go down that route. I would make sure that you do, and I would make sure that you actively engage with the process, because it's a process of learning. It's also a good sort of kite mark, I suppose, for employees to know that you're kind of recognising that and supporting that, and then moving forward and trying to get good engagement with the unions to get sort of fairer conditions across the board.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next one, we have a meeting with the unions to begin a process of restructuring our business. What do we need to be aware of?
Okay, so in organisations where unions are part of the process of restructure, you need to be informing them of your plans to make changes, and you need to be discussing all manner of things about how that affects. Excuse me, one second. How that affects the people that they support, and the wider business. So it is part of your planning. So you do need to go back, and a bit like we said earlier about things like the collective agreement process, you do need to go back. So you do need to sort of plan this in terms of timelines. Restructuring, that sort of change, as anyone who's in HR will know, can take months. It can be quite a lengthy process. So when you're beginning to have those changes in mind, it's probably before those months begin that you're having those conversations with the unions. The unions will have challenges. They will challenge, and they will ask you to look at the process differently. The reason for that is that redundancy is the last port of call, so it's the last place. Restructuring is part of, well, how can we make changes to the business that protect jobs as much as we can? So what we want to do is safeguard the roles that we've got, and that's what the union would be there to do. Effectively, they'd also be drawing on things like collective agreements already in place. So anything around maybe bonuses that might have been agreed, or anything around sort of holidays or anything like that, they may well be looking at asking you to look at what, have you remembered this, what this is our position on it. They may also be asking you to sort of consider other ways to restructure that you may not have already considered, and that in itself can be quite a lengthy process. If they are representing freelancers, so people who are not employed, again, any restructure may well still affect them. So if you're making restructure changes, you may well be looking at, well, I'm going to cut the use of freelancers, or I'm going to increase the amount of freelancers. In those cases, and both cases, you still need to consult with the union and get them very much involved with those changes, as much as you can, because they will have many things to consider, not least if it's freelancers, about availability and pay, and how that happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a real strong emphasis on consulting with unions as early as possible with this. I think the mistake is often made, and this isn't only where unions involved, but just generally with restructures and redundancies. The mistake is often made that people do not consider this as part of their timeline enough.
Yeah.
To actually properly consult and give time to consult when these type of big changes are happening. Where a union's involved, the more time you give to that period where you need to be speaking to them about it, about the whole strategy for it, involving them in that, and like Sarah said, like their thoughts around it as well, that's imperative to the rest of the consultation then running smoothly. If you don't get that right to begin with, you're going to face barrier after barrier after barrier, and they will also get quite defensive over the whole thing. So your best bet in all of this is just to have those transparent conversations as early as possible.
I think as well, if you've got those conversations going on with the union and you are engaging with them with the view to hearing what they're saying, then you are going to be in a much stronger position, both from a safeguarding of your business, but also of your employees or freelancers that you're working with. If you are going into that situation with an ardent view that you're not going to back down, I think you're going to find that you're up against it. And I have seen from experience that strike action can come into it. And once you've got strike action, you've got a whole headache. And I mean that in so much as you've got so much more to consider. And also there's a negative press that comes along with things like strike action. So it's about, are you ready and prepared for that battle, which you may well not come out of very well. So which are the, you know, what are you trying to achieve from this is probably really key to how you get those outcomes. Unions are there to protect, so that is their role, but it's also, they also want, you know, to see, they want to see, you know, they don't want employers to end, you know, nobody does, otherwise there's no, you know, there's no win for anyone there. So yeah, I think that's probably the place to sort of leave that on, otherwise we'll get into the strike pain.
Yeah, this does tie in with the next question though. So where a union doesn't agree, or where you can't reach an agreement with the union around something like a restructure, and the plans that are there, can the business still proceed with what they're proposing?
This is really complex, and I'm sure if I was a lawyer, there would be a huge amount that a lawyer would have to say to this. In essence, yes, is the short answer of it, but I wouldn't. Is the way to say it, and I wouldn't just because you are threatened at this point with strike action. You are threatened with there is so much more, and really the sort of the longer answer is no, you can't really proceed really if a union isn't agreeing with it, because really what they're saying is you're not being fair, you're not being reasonable, and you're really probably not being lawful.
Also, so this is where, sorry to interrupt, this is where things also reach the media. So yeah, if you want to avoid bad press and bad media, then you do everything that you can to negotiate with the unions and come up with some kind of agreement on a way forwards, by kind of bulldozing your way through and almost disregarding their input and their suggestions and saying, well, we're going to do it our way anyway. Yeah,
I've never seen that end well. I've never seen that end well, and I have to say I've always seen that result in the resignation of someone senior, usually more than one person that's senior. So that means the CEO, that means a board, that might mean more than just the CEO and the board. So I have to say I've never seen that end well, and I don't think it's a valuable position to take, because I don't think it sends any good messages, because I don't think it will just, the ones that hit the headlines are the CEOs and the boards that step down. The ones that don't hit the headlines is the rest of the company is also left, or you've left with very, very few people, because who wants to work for an organization that doesn't want good outcomes for their people, really?
So I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball in here. Bearing in mind everything that we're discussing here, on the flip side, why would an organisation voluntarily recognise a union?
I think it's good practice, isn't it? You know, it's saying that we're fair and we're trying to move to better working conditions for people. Ultimately, that's what a union representative is there to do, is to arbitrate an organisation between you, the organisation, and the employee to try and get better working conditions. It might well be that you've misunderstood what good looks like. It might be that you've done that naively, or it might be that you've done that intentionally. If but either way, if you don't sort of recognise it and you're not willing, what does that say about you? And actually, in today's world where technology and amplifies our voice, everyone, no matter your age, is looking. It isn't just sort of the younger generations. Everyone is looking for better working conditions. So why wouldn't you? I think is the sort of the answer to that. There are cases, where perhaps something's intensely secure, and you might not feel that you wanted to involve a union at that point. But we do still have mechanisms like NDAs, whereby you can get people to sort of understand the confidentiality of something. Unions aren't there to spread gossip either. A union spreading gossip is not a union, so I think you have to remember that, why are you, question yourself, why are you not recognizing a union? What is it that worries you?
Yeah.
And maybe seek some advice there as well. Discuss it with people, and then people, trusted people, not the world, and then have take a professional view on it. More often than not, a union representative wants a good outcome for everyone. So try and look at that, look at it from that position, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The question here. I've never had any experience of dealing with a union rep. Should I be worried?
The long and short of this is it can feel very scary if a union person is coming towards you with all of this knowledge and you feel like you're being ambushed by it. Whether you're HR or not HR, that can feel like you're being trapped into a corner. So I can't tell you how to feel and how you might feel, but if you know that you are seeking to get an outcome that's constructive for the employee or employees, then no, you shouldn't be worried about a union rep. You should be working with them to get that outcome. If, for example, though, you know that you've done something unlawful, unreasonable, or something along those lines with an employee, then yes, I think a union is there to do their job, and they're probably there to hold you to account. That doesn't mean that where you start with a union discussion is where it will end. So it doesn't mean that you start with something that can feel quite angsty is where it ends, if you can show that you've learned during that process and you recognise that the outcome that you thought you were beginning with isn't where you're actually going to end up, and you're actually going to achieve something positive for the employee or employees. I think that's probably how to put it. A union rep generally isn't there to be aggressive and scare the living bejesus out of you. They're usually there to try and get a better outcome for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So tying in with the ERB that we've already mentioned.
Oh joy! This is the field that you absolutely love at the moment, isn't it?
I wouldn't say I love it.
No, this is our challenge at the moment, isn't it? This thing is ping-ponging back to us.
Yeah. So in light of everything that's going on, there's a question around what will change in terms of unions and any legislation that's in place around unions at the moment. What's going to change in line with the ERB proposals?
So this is really your field of speciality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the headlines of it, and you can fill in some information on it. Just for clarity here and around this, there is a lot of toing and froing, as we've said, with the Employee Bill of Rights at the moment. Where we are right now, November 2025, may not be where we are November 2026. Because nothing has been signed and sealed, so to speak, at the moment. But proposals look like currently a repeal of the strikes minimum service levels Act 2023, a major part of the Trade Union Act of 2016, which will be immediate upon royal assent. So that will take immediate effect, allegedly, from royal assent. So as soon as this bill is passed, this will remove restrictions on unions, such as the ability for employees to require a minimum service level during a strike, and the requirement for a higher threshold of support in strike ballots. So I already mentioned earlier on this session that strikes become technical and there's a lot to them. This is one of the reasons. So that's point one. The next point is new protections preventing dismissal for participating in industrial action. Again, this is an action that would take immediate effect upon royal assent. Going into the next one, simplifying trade union recognition processes. That would take effect from April 2026 once it was signed off by royal assent. So that we're still waiting for this to go through, so we haven't got to that point. So this could be pushed back, but we don't know. So the next one is duty to inform workers of their right to join a trade union, and consultation. So that's out for consultation right now.
That's what we referenced before, more towards the beginning of this session, when we were talking about rights in general, for employees to join a trade union, and how that's going to be emphasised even more through this proposal, where you as an employer are going to have to specifically tell them of that right in a form of some kind of statement that's then issued annually. So yeah, as we said before, that is out for consultation at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see what comes back off that.
Yeah, okay, it's really, yeah, that's a really interesting one. If that does go through, it will be, so if this whole act gets passed in the next few weeks, this will look to be tabled from October 2026. So the next piece is expanding trade union rights, including the right of access to workplaces. Again, something that's out for consultation right now, but the government proposes excluding employers with fewer than 21 workers from the new right of access.
Yes, this is for like small employer protections, I guess, that it wouldn't be something that small businesses would need to be involved in. But as with any consultation, that could have pushback, it could change, it could be different. But at the moment, what's in there is any employers with fewer than 21 workers would be excluding. So do remember that workers doesn't just mean permanent employees.
No, that can include freelancers as well. And it is important to clarify that point around unions that cover freelancers as well as employers. But we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, and the final piece on this is, oh no, there's two more. The government proposes that employers will have 5 working days to respond to a union's access request. And the government has proposed that weekly access to physical, digital, or both be included as a model term in access agreements. So what that means basically is that a union does have the right to access an employee through their organisation, so they're through their place of work. And what that means is that they're sort of, they could be, able to just sort of be there kind of on a weekly kind of clinic basis, I'm assuming, or sort of just be available, make themselves more available rather than just sort of waiting for the employee to contact them, I'm guessing. Protections for those taking industrial action, that's the next piece. So take we touched on the strikes thing, and maybe we'll pick this up on a separate clinic, but strikes is something that is in itself is quite challenging. So you are at that place and you do have a situation whereby that is a threat. You absolutely definitely need advice. Absolutely can't ChatGPT is not your friend in that situation, nor any other AI, nor it is at all within the HR, I would argue, but definitely not in this place. If you are at that stage, you need help. But this right is looking to give further protections against industrial action, and again that would come out in October. And then finally, looking to 2027, there's a view to sort of creating an industrial relations framework. Really, that's kind of looking at what good working practices are, I would assume, and sort of what does fair look like.
Yeah, I think it'll be encompassing it all, the protections, the processes, all of it together, but also a wait and see.
I think this is a really good example of how technical and complex HR legislation is becoming, and why you really, once you start to get union representation involved, you really do need to have specialist advice. If the government is looking to have better union representation across industry, which it is, to create fair working, good working practices, then really even if you're a small business or a large business, I think what you need to know is that these are complex situations that where you don't have that representation can lead to quite complex employee relations situations, and you can't resolve that on your own. And as I sort of made a joke about earlier, ChatGPT just isn't defending these situations. In fact, if anything, I would say it can create more levels of complexity. So Alexandra, is there anything more that you want to add, as you are our font of all knowledge on the employee bill of rights?
No, I don't think so. Not from the RB perspective. I think that's a decent overview of everything that's going through with the proposals at the moment. I think it is just important just to bear in mind, like we said, that with things going through this ping pong motion at the moment, the roadmap and the dates of what have been set out there are probably quite likely to change. Considering that the ones that were meant to be immediate upon royal assent were proposed for October.
Yep.
We're now almost a month down the line from when that should have taken place, and we're still no further along. So I would anticipate that the timelines are going to slip somewhat. Also bear in mind that through consultation periods things change. So I think it's quite difficult to say anything more on it at the moment.
I think with things being in consultation, if you do want to take part in the consultation, then you will find them on the government website, and it's certainly worth putting your voice forward. I also think that another point to just recognise is generally law sort of updates come in two times in the year, which is why April and October are mentioned on this employment bill of rights. What would happen if we don't reach April? It's generally, it can be one of two things. It can either wait till October, or they can come through statute law, which just means that they'll come in anyway. And we would have to start sort of seeing that they came in sort of they might bring them in more immediately than sort of wait. But we'll have to see on that, and we can keep you updated and certainly knowledgeable about this. I think with all these employment bill of rights things, it's really important that you recognise that this is huge changes to legislation, unlike we've seen for a long time. So I think it's really important that you are aware of what those changes are, and you proactively look to get advice on how they affect you. Just because on the basis of the fact that if you don't, you've got this kind of strength of unions, you may well have a very different situation and challenge on your hands. So I think it's important to perhaps get some advice around that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that does bring us to the end of the questions. So I think unless there's anything further that you'd want to say on the topic, Sarah, we can tie up the session there.
I don't think I've got anything more to add. That really tested my union knowledge.
Okay.
Union rep to get in touch if we've missed anything.
Yeah, so we will leave it there, and thank you for listening and watching.